Wonderful, we're on. Fantastic. Welcome everyone. Really delighted for you all to join us with the incredible panel we have with us today. For this session on basic income, really an introduction to help us all understand more about what basic income is, what it isn't, all the arguments, pros, cons, and otherwise. It just seems like it's something that's getting more and more coverage in politically and in the media, and it's important for us to understand much more about it. And we have an absolutely incredible panel with us today. I'm not going to attempt to introduce the panel. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves shortly. My name's Zoe from Extinction Rebellion, and really just by way of introduction, I know some colleagues on this webinar will be XR rebels, XR members, others may not be. That's fine, we welcome absolutely everyone, and we do plan to share this video recording out to colleagues more widely. And also to say, just to acknowledge that Extinction Rebellion doesn't explicitly promote a particular set of solutions to the climate and ecological crisis and the associated social justice crisis alongside that. So we welcome a whole range of views, and as XR members listening to this will know, well, our third demand is for Citizens Assembly to come up with a set of solutions and approaches to have a mandate for politicians. So we're not advocating a particular approach necessarily. However, this is a really interesting area of work that we like to know more about and to understand more. So without further ado, I'd like just in turn ask our panel members to spend a couple minutes introducing themselves and where they're from, their backgrounds, anything you'll expertise here with us from all over the world, which is absolutely brilliant. So I'm just going to go in the order of folk that are on my screen, so semi-random. Barb, would you be happy to introduce yourself and have a couple of minutes to talk about your work? Thank you.
Oh, you're on mute, Barb.
Right. Hi, thanks very much for having me. I'm Barb Jacobson. I'm coordinator of Basic Income UK, which is a national campaigning group. And we've been, the last since the crisis started, we've been organizing with a lot of local groups in the UK for an emergency basic income. And that's now sort of turned into a recovery basic income demand. So it's been very exciting. A bunch of new local groups have popped up in the meantime and under the UBI Lab network. And we're also working with another group called the Basic Income Conversation, which is new, and Citizens Basic Income Trust. So it's Basic Income UK, UBI Lab network, and the Basic Income Conversation, which are the main groups working on this, but we also rely very heavily on the research and expertise of the Citizens Basic Income Trust, which has been going since 1986. I'm in London, just in case you're interested.
Welcome. Thank you so much. It's really great to understand, and good to have you joining us from London. Thank you. Next on my screen is Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hi. Yes, so I am a founding director of World Basic Income. So we are, along with Paul Harnett, who you can also see, we run an organisation that campaigns to take the basic income idea to the global level as well. So we're huge supporters of national basic incomes provided by governments. I can't wait to receive mine. That would be a huge help. But we also believe that we need a mechanism to redistribute wealth from the rich of the world to everybody in the world. That there's the huge injustice of worldwide poverty that still exists, and the direct cash transfers to everybody is what we deserve, it's what we need. It has the potential to contribute to solving a huge amount of social problems, and then depending how you fund it, it has the potential to help solve climate change and other ecological problems as well. So that our organisation is called World Basic Income. We set it up a few years ago, and it's great to be here talking to you all.
Brilliant, thank you. Laura, I really appreciate that. I'm excited already to hear more from everyone. Before asking Sarath to introduce himself. I'm just noticing in the chat that colleagues are already wanting to understand and have links to the groups that you're all representing and are members of. So if you're happy to share those links in the chat, brilliant. Thanks, Barb. Then people will be really interested to follow those up, I'm sure. So thank you for that. Sarath, can I hand over to you to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful being here. Thanks, Zoe, and the team which has put this up together. My name is Sarath Davila. I'm the coordinator of India Network for Basic Income and also the vice chair of Basic Income Earth Network. I'm a sociologist by training, and I've been working with Women's Trade Union and several civil society organizations the last more than 20 years. I was part of the research team that did the MP basic income pilot in India, in Madhya Pradesh in India. And subsequently, we did a follow-up study, and then we set up a network, India Network for Basic Income, which actually was instrumental in bringing about the debate in India. And in 2017, it was also at the government level in India and at the political party level. I think there was a lot of discussion. In the last elections, also basic income was on the agenda. Right now, after COVID, we seem to have developed an amnesia about all our history. Now we are completely involved in relief work because the informal sector workers and the migrant workers are really in a bad situation, and the lockdown, we have forgotten about COVID also. It's more the lockdown that has created such a huge problem. So at the moment, we are doing both relief work in terms of providing dry rations to people and also emergency basic income. And by collaborating with the postal department so that it reaches even those people who do not have the proper, so-called proper documentation. So that's it. That's what I'm at the moment involved in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarath. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. Caroline, would you be happy to introduce yourself?
You're on mute still as well, Caroline.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. My name is Caroline. I'm based in Nairobi. I work for Give Directly here in Kenya, but have responsibilities across Africa for 7 countries. I have a background as a development communication specialist, and for many years now, I have been working as an advocacy specialist for different kinds of issues. And recently, when I joined Give Directly, I joined in as field director for the Basic Income Pilot that was launched here in Kenya, and have since transitioned. And currently, my position is Director of Recipients Advocacy. So basically, anything that's in the interest of the people is my interest. And that's why I'm here with all these lovely people. Thanks, Laura, for incorporating me in the World Basic Income, where I sit as one of the advisory board members of the World Basic Income fraternity. At Give Directly, in terms of basic income, what would I say? Not so different from what Sarath is saying. And now we are more scared about what is going to be happening to people beyond COVID, and I'm more concerned about livelihood messes that we are seeing the realities, especially in urban informal settlements, and now creeping into rural areas. People losing jobs, jobs as things we took for granted as women washing clothes for better-to-do households and earning an income for their households are now not available. Men working in construction sites now cannot work. And while we thought that those might have been dirty and insignificant, sources of income, it's now just hitting us how badly it is to the economy and to the livelihoods of people. People are pretty much imminently going to be facing hunger, and if we are not careful, even death. And governments may not be able to control it if they don't start addressing it right now. As Give Directly, we may not have the bandwidth to lift everyone into our arms and to carry on a full basic income that can go a long way. But we are committed to the dream of a basic income. And for Kenya, what we have done currently is launched a program that is initially going to be reaching 50,000 people with $30 per month. And we started it in April, and we continue to fundraise for it. Hopefully this can be sustained. We are also doing this in Malawi, in Uganda. Hopefully we are also going to be activating Guinea. So looking forward to updating you all on how this is going. The Guinea program is likely going to be a really big program supported by the government of Guinea. So stay tuned for updates.
Thank you so much, Caroline. It's brilliant to have you here. Thank you so much for giving us an overview of what you're involved in. It's amazing. Good to hear from Paul next.
Hi everybody, I'm also a founder of World Basic Income. I've spent nearly all my adult life in development, international development. I've worked extensively in Africa, Asia, Latin America. I'm an economist, and just over 20 years ago I gave out some money, not a basic income, just a one-off, to people in Malawi. And I could track exactly what they did with it. And they were brilliant. They all spent it wisely. And ever since, my thought has always been the solution to poverty is give them the cash. That's me.
Beautifully simple. Much appreciated. And you're joining us here from the north of England as well, aren't you?
Manchester, yeah.
Do you happen to, has Julio managed to join us? I wasn't sure whether he was able to get here. Do you know?
Not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's, again, as I say, he's been in another meeting. I think he just got the times mixed up. Yeah.
All right. So we'll continue. That's absolutely fine. Well, thank you for all the introductions, guys. And just to say to the approximately 50 odd people watching and listening, thank you for being here. As you're listening, do please start to put questions in the chat, and we'll be able to come on to those questions as time goes on. Just going to really touch on some of the most basic questions that some of us who know very little about this topic might be thinking to start off with, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. So do be thinking as you're listening what you'd like to ask, and feel free to put questions in the chat, and Rachel and I will pick those up. Okay, I guess you've sort of touched on this in your introductions, but let's just start at the beginning, and I'll ask the question and then just say who you feel is the sort of best place to answer this one. Really just to give us an overview of what is essentially the idea of a basic income, and how can it actually work? Who can give us just a really nice simple picture of that?
Sarath.
Okay. Okay. In my view, I think a universal basic income is actually the next level in our democratic journey, and also a more civilized society. I think we need to take that leap, and I think we are gaining that momentum in that direction. Basic income is actually, all of us know that it has 5 important characteristics. It is universal, it is individual, it is cash only, it's periodic, which is monthly, and most important, the real cutting edge of the basic income concept is it's unconditional. Unconditional, we have always reserved it for our family and for my wife and my child, my grandchild and my blah, blah, blah. We have restricted, we are capable of unconditionality, unconditional love, but we have restricted it only to my family, to the private domain. But I think now we have to extract it and bring it to the public square and say everybody deserves unconditional love. And in public square, unconditional that they do what they want. It is that vision that basic income basic income carries. That is it gives a solid ground for everybody to stand on and then participate in the labor market. It is not against capitalism. It is a capitalism where you don't start from zero.
Beautiful way of describing it. Thanks, Sarah. Really beautiful way of describing it. Any colleagues like to add to that definition or description of the basic income before we move on?
I'd just like to say that it's really important that it's the individual, that it goes to individuals. And that's certainly one of the things that very much attracted me to the idea. I've got a background in feminist campaigning, and particularly in the need for women to have their own money. Particularly in relation to, things that happen in the family, the fact that, it may be a wealthy family, but not everybody gets the same amount, the kind of position that women are in terms of domestic violence and being able to escape. So that's been my personal interest in it, but I think it's also extremely important to emphasize that it does go to individuals and it's not done on a household basis. So, yeah. Yeah,
it's a really powerful point.
Me and Laura are going to say the same thing. So, Laura, you say it better than me.
I was just going to say, for those who are not too fond of capitalism, and I count myself in that number, basic income has the amazing ability to, as Sarath says, function perfectly well within capitalism, but also it's fundamentally a socialist or an equality-focused initiative that would work well in kind of any political system. It's certainly not based on an idea of economic growth or on an idea of wealth concentration for the rich. So you can come to it whatever your political persuasion, but I think you're most likely to like it best if you're somebody who prefers a level of equality and dignity.
I think one other important thing about basic income is the space it opens for civic participation, because it gives voice to the voiceless. That people start viewing the world as an equal world, an equal space where everyone has a space to be considered as human. It basically, basic income humanizes human beings one more time. It gives people choice, and it empowers people who hitherto remained disempowered and may not have been heard forever. And this is something that, it's just as practical and as simple as just give that money to the people and you will hear them speak. People will talk about peace. People will talk about democracy. People will talk about the concern of leaders just because they feel somebody cares about it. That is what basic income is all about.
So powerful to hear you say that, Caroline. Thank you. Thank you so much. I've just had a message from Rachel kindly to say that Julio's arrived. So I think we can say hi to Julio and ask, Julio, if you can unmute yourself if you're muted and just introduce yourself and say a little bit about, Sarath, are you wanting to come in?
Oh, hi, Julio.
Oh, you're waving at Julio, yeah. Julio, come and join us.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I was late. I was in another call and, the time zone, I was a bit confused. My name is Julio. I'm from Guatemala. I'm now based in Berlin. I am part of the Basic Income Math Network, currently doing social outreach work. I am an economic anthropologist. And currently I'm working on a project here in Berlin, which tries to sort of think about the relationship between anarchism and basic income. So how can we bring about the basic income from below, from the bottom up? We're usually always waiting for politicians to give us a basic income, and we're arguing for it in all these policy discussions. In Berlin, what we're trying to organize is a set of relationships of trust, of complementarity between different people, to say, how can we communalize the wealth around us and give ourselves a basic income? So that's kind of what I'm working on at the moment.
Thank you. Brilliant to have your perspective and experience. Thank you. I can see that the questions are just starting to come in the chat, which is brilliant. So keep the questions coming, guys, as audience, and we will come to those shortly. This is, again, a really obvious question. Oh, Paul, you've got your finger up. Go on.
Okay, I'll just finish on what is the basic income.
Right.
I thought Laura was going to say this, but really following on from what Barb said, It's so important to have it to the individual. But in World Basic Income, we've always argued that children should receive it as well, and that ordinarily the basic income to each child should go to the mother. I know that gets complicated if you're an orphan, etc., but there are mechanisms, guardians, etc. So that's a kind of, you know, should it go to the child or not? Or should the child get half a basic income or whatever? Those are discussions that are going on around the basic income movement, but we say it should go to the child as well as the adult.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's really interesting. Gives us a bigger perspective of the conversation. So maybe you can start us off, Paul, and then pass the baton to one of your colleagues in terms of how might it actually work in practice? Because it feels like such a big idea if you haven't, you know, if you haven't read about it or thought about it a lot. It just feels like such a big idea on a, you know, on a community or country or global basis. How might it actually work?
Okay, basically we've got enough money in the world, so getting hold of the money shouldn't be a problem. Unfortunately, a lot of it is with very, very rich people. But if we reformed our tax systems, if we taxed some of the bad practices that are going on around the world at the moment, there'd be plenty of money to give a basic income to everybody in the world. How would you get it to them? Well, Caroline knows this as much as anybody, because in Africa, there's a mobile banking system, and that is not over the internet. That is using an old Nokia, where you can actually transfer cash. You can walk up to a table and transfer 50,000 shillings to the person behind the table on your phone, and they give you the cash. So, and there are other methods of transferring cash. ID is a bit of a problem, but again, we have the technology to ensure that we have ID. Sarath knows in India that the coverage, the biometric ID covers, let's say 98, 99% of the population. It could be improved, there's a few holes in it, but so we have the cash, we have the technology, we just don't have political will. We're not looking after our people. That is the blockage. So it can work, and Caroline's absolutely the best person to talk about this. She's giving out the basic income to 60,000 people.
Oh, we'll come to Caroline. We'll come to you in a sec, Caroline. I just think from an XR perspective and a climate perspective, we've heard that before, haven't we? We know how to do this. We've got the tools to do it. We just lack the political will. Gosh, that sounds familiar. Thanks for that, Paul. Caroline, go on, pick up where Paul left off then, if you're happy to.
Yeah, so like Paul is saying right there, a lot of countries, if they had political goodwill, would be able to, you know, lift a basic income, even as a show of goodwill to its people. Because I like to tell the story of basic income with the realities of people's lives. And one example that happened this week in Kenya is a poor woman, a widow whose husband died last year, last week, was literally cooking stones to while away time for her children to go to sleep. That type of a person should never be let live that type of a life. And no government can say that they do not have enough to reach those kind of people. That goodwill is what creates momentum for a basic income. Because once we see 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 1 million people benefiting from that a basic income, then we create the momentum that can reach everybody in the whole country. It doesn't matter how remote you are. It doesn't matter how poor you are or how unintelligent you are. A basic income can be given by as simple as a 2 SMS touch point with a recipient, just to confirm that they actually exist and they have a mobile money wallet, and that money hits their account. And you can't believe it. Some people may say that, you know, if you give them money, they will waste it. They will drink it away. And I stop to ask, how much is wasted by our government? How much is just lost? that can just be used to help hundreds of thousands of people who are suffering? And how paternalistic can people get to make a decision about people who are on the verge of dying? To decide that when you get money, you'd rather drink alcohol rather than eat it. And how paternalistic it would be for people to imagine that if you're extremely poor, that you can actually not withdraw money from a mobile money wallet and bring it home with livelihood benefits to your family. We have seen that all these are lies. It is possible. Governments here in Africa have tried to do something that could be akin to what we are looking at as a basic income model, which is targeting population segments, giving money to old persons, orphans and vulnerable children, people living with disabilities, people living in hunger-stricken and famine-stricken environments. And they have seen that this actually works. If it does work, then I think it is time for the aid environment, governments, political leaders to see that there is potential in putting money in people's pockets so that people can have a better life.
Thank you, Caroline. Whether I can see Laura and Sarath want to come in. Laura,
Yeah.
I think your hand up was up slightly first.
I just wanted to jump in on how you pay for basic income.
Yeah,
So there's really two models of basic income that are being discussed in this call. There's national basic income, which basically is funded by general taxation in most countries. That's the proposal for the UK. A really good detailed proposal that that's been developed is the one in the Green Party's 2019 manifesto. That tells you exactly how much people would get, how much it would cost, and then the total where the money would come from comes from the last chapter. So that's in the Green Party's 2019 manifesto for a national model. For a global model, for a world basic income, we've spent the last few years developing some really detailed costings on this. One of the biggest potential funding streams comes from an international carbon tax. So there's a lot of good reasons why we think carbon tax should be international, not least that you don't want the most polluting countries to get the biggest revenues from carbon tax and the least polluting countries to get nothing. That's deeply unjust. So an international carbon tax with the money put in a sovereign wealth fund, so basically a fund of money owned by the people of the world that could then be invested in positive things like renewable energy infrastructure. So you essentially have wind turbines owned by the people of the world, and then the revenues that comes from that goes into a pot and gets distributed. So that's one mechanism, and we propose a lot of other mechanisms as well. I've posted the link in the chat. I'll post it again now. Oh, sorry, God, there's a crazy noise just gone past my house. But yeah, there's a lot of detailed work gone into the funding of these things, and then and into every other element as well. So Caroline's talked about how the money is distributed. There's various proposals for how you make sure that you get people individually identified. There's biometric methods, there's digital methods like Bright ID. So there's really no practical barriers to this, and there's a lot of detailed work if you go looking for it.
Thank you, Laura. I think Sarath wants to come in, and then Barb.
Yeah, there are 2-3 issues here, Zoe. I think one is that delivery of cash. This doesn't apply to Europe and the United States, but I think it applies a lot to Asian countries and African countries. Can you actually fix the last mile? I completely agree with what Paul has said, that I think it is possible. We have the money. We also can. If we can send a satellite into the space, into Mars or to somewhere else, we can send wretched money to that last man. And we have shown during the COVID times, government gave some cash to the regular people who have the biometric system and are part of the food security program, which is one of the largest programs. But then they said, for the migrant workers, by the way, migrant workers in my city are 20% of the population. So they're not small. So they have always been there, but we never saw them. We never realized that there are so many. Like after the flood, all the ants come out of the earth. They all came out of the earth, which means the reality has always been there, but this comes and puts a magnifying glass on what our life is like, what our society is like, what the inequalities are like. So it is possible. Then we said that we we can give even the migrant workers. So we did a pilot here, and we said, here is 100 names, and here are the phone mobile numbers. We went to the Postmaster General and we said that, can you deliver this cash through your money order system? And you charge your 2%, whatever, we will pay that. And the next day, post office went, 4 postmen went to those 100 people and handed over money. I mean, it doesn't take, it is not rocket science at all. So there is lack of political will. I mean, governments would love to say that we want to do it, but it's not possible. We want to show, our job is to show that it is possible. Now, the question is that, does it work? Does it really work? When the money reaches the people, there are a huge set of myths saying that they will drink it away is the first thing, and then they will waste the money. They don't know how to plan, blah, 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 and all that. I think these are all the middle class and the chattering classes and the other classes are saturated with these lovely prejudices that those fellows can't manage their lives, whereas we can manage our lives. Okay, that kind of a notion is there. But I come from a pilot study where we lived in the village for 2 years and saw people what they do when they get money for 18 months. We sat with them, we stayed in the village, we saw what they did. I'll tell you what they did. They started planning their life in a very different way. They did not make any radical shifts in their employment, radical shifts in their food. It's just a mild choice, a slight change of a different choice. From an exploitative borrower, money lender, they move to a soft source of borrowing money. From an exploitative employer, if they have a choice, they move to somebody who doesn't exploit them. They make those choices. Their agency comes to the fore. So my conviction today doesn't come from my academic reading. My conviction comes from looking at people, what they do, what they did in our program. And even now when we are giving, we are looking at people. We are sitting with people to understand what they do with money. It's extremely important. Governments would like to look at people, poor particularly, as animals in the zoo. They just need rice. So you give them rice. You have a grand $30 billion food security program and say, this is one of the world's greatest food security program. What about medicines? Where will they buy milk from? How will they pay their rent? What do you think of human beings? Do you think they're animals? With due respect to animals. So the whole point is we are constantly trying to prove that it works. And I think more of us, many more people, all in pilots have to keep proving that yes, it works. It works, it definitely works. And we have to, I would rather make a mistake by trusting people than make a mistake by mistrusting people.
Beautifully put, Sarah. It's lovely to hear your passion and to hear all of your respective personal experiences directly on the ground with communities. It's so powerful. Barb, I think you wanted to come in, and I'm really conscious at the top of my screen I can't see Julio, so I don't know whether you wanted to come in or not, Julio. But
yeah,
Barb.
Julio does want to come in. I just wanted to make a couple points. One is that I think it's important to keep separate the idea of basic income, or the principles of it, and all the different policies. Okay, so there's all different ideas out there about how to pay for it, how much it is, what mechanism you use and stuff like that. Okay, and I think sometimes critics get too focused on one particular policy that they don't like without actually dealing with the principle. All right, and Leanne Gale made a really good point in the chat box, all right, about that it's not so much about money, it's about caring. All right, and the fact that a basic income really really reinforces the idea that we're all here to look out for each other. I mean, I think, I've had an XR person in my house for quite a while. He's not here right now because of lockdown, but you know, what we were always arguing about, you know, he'd come back home with his hair on fire about the carbon, you know, about about climate change and how this was affecting people. And I'm also, I didn't say I've been a welfare rights advisor. And so I'd have to be saying, well, look, there are a lot of people who can't get through the next day, all right? And so extinction for them, as Carolyn was saying, is an immediate problem, all right? It's not like something that's gonna happen in 2 or 3 years' time, or 10, or pick a number, okay? It's something that's really immediate for people. And I really think that, you know, a measure like basic income would free up a lot of people to care about the environment and each other, all right, rather than having to worry, you know, from 1 minute to the next where their food is coming from, or where their rent is coming from, or being on the streets.
Thank you, Barb. That's really powerful. Julio, did you want to come in on that before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, just on the sort of question of political will, I think for me it's very important to understand that you know, today is May Day, right? And we have to remember that all of the rights that we have came because of previous struggles of people that came before us. And this, exactly in these times of crisis, is a moment when we really have to push politicians into making a basic income happen. I think for myself personally, like, I do not, you know, mostly in politics, people think that the plot of politics is to take control of the state in order to change it from within. But this shouldn't be this is a very limiting horizon of what politics actually is. So when we talk about political will, we also have political will. We have the political will to ask and to say, we want to democratize money. We want to change the way in which money is produced. We don't need central banks. We don't need private banks. We can issue money ourselves as a basic income, you know? We don't really need, in theory, we don't need all these states and governments to give it to ourselves. If we claim the right to do this, to give ourselves a basic income from below, it totally changes the political possibilities of what is, you know, what can you do as a society, as a community, and so on.
Wow, that's a whole nother way of looking at it, isn't it? It's a whole nother dimension. Just striking me how sometimes the world is as it is because of the lack of imagination. When we really work our imagination here, it can go in so many directions to make such a difference. Thank you, Julio, that's brilliant. I just want to ask one more question before we open up to there's some great stuff coming in the chat, so keep it coming, guys, with your questions and comments. It's really brilliant. And then for people that you should be able to save the chat. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner of the chat, there's a box with 3 little dots in. If you click on that, there's an option to save chat, just for people who are interested in saving all the links and comments and questions, because there's some great stuff in there, so thank you for that. Just sort of maybe last question before we go to the questions in the chat and open up. Really, what are the main arguments against basic income on all its forms? What are the who are the skeptics, and what are the main arguments against it? Who'd like to kick us off on that?
Yeah, Laura, if you want to go, or.
So one of the big arguments that we get against it from the left wing is there's a couple of arguments. I think sometimes basic income has got a reputation as something to replace working and paid work. I think personally, I feel like that's a distraction from what this is really about. Like, there is an argument for basic income based on, or you know, that machines are going to take all our jobs in the end. And I think it's important for us to be, you know, ready and responding to that kind of technological change. But ultimately, we're not suggesting that you have a basic income instead of decent jobs, good workers' rights, solid public services, you know, fair wages. All of those things are also essential, but we don't have to pick and choose. You know, no one suggests, you know, when you call for more funding for healthcare, no one suggests that you don't also care about education, for instance. We assume that it's possible to properly fund both healthcare and education, and we demand that our governments do that. And in the same way, we demand that, you know, that we receive a basic income and also receive proper workers' rights, a fair wage, you know, efforts to make the economy produce decent jobs for us. There's no reason why we can't have all of these things. So I think that's one argument that comes against basic income from the left. But to me, to me, it's a real dud. You know, we don't need to choose which good things we have in life. We can demand all of these things, and they're not in competition with each other.
Thank you. Sarath, I can see you want to come in.
Yeah, I think, Zoe, there are moral arguments against basic income. There are political, there are economic arguments, there are a wide variety of arguments that we hear, and we have to constantly address those, the critique. Now, moral argument is that when there's the whole, we have inherited the industrial work ethic that if you don't work, you don't deserve to be paid. But again, this is in the public domain, not in the private domain, you know. You don't, you give your children money, you give your children education, but you don't ask them to work for it, isn't it? So we have one rule there, and we have another rule in the public square. To say that you should be paid a wage, that you have to sell your labor in the market and only then you deserve. So the welfare system is designed around this idea. Either they pay you for your past labor or the current labor or the future labor. That is where the investment is supposed to go. I think that is going to change completely in the 21st century, because we are not going to have that many jobs, definitely, but I think we have the wealth. That is the paradox of the 21st century, that we have the wealth, but doesn't matter. So Guy Standing makes a distinction between work and labor. Labor is what you sell in the market, but work is something that you can choose to do. You can do care work, you can do whatever work you like to do. So that is that's a moral, ethical argument that no, you should not pay. In fact, I think one of our, our own government statements said that would Gandhi have approved, Mahatma Gandhi would we have approved unconditional basic income? He would have, he wouldn't have. So there's a huge debate about that. Now, the political argument is that the state is going to give this cash and then run away from all its, that's the left in India. It's going to run away from all its responsibilities and then say that we have given you cash. You don't ask us anything more. I will not give you the road. You don't have a right to ask me for a road. You make your own road. So that kind of is the economic argument that we can't afford it. We can't afford it, and we can't hit this percentage of the GDP and all, and then slowly we are walked into the quagmire of the economic concepts and the GDPs and the growth, blah blah blah, and all that. So, but I think they really don't stand to the test of a vision and the truth of the matter. Because how do you fund it? The question is, it's a very weak argument, because you can't go to a priest and say, Padre, I want to go to heaven, but don't ask me to change anything about my life. Okay, so I don't think you'll get a very good response from the Padre if you say that. First thing is that Padre will give you 10 things that you should not do, and then 10 things that you should do. So if we want a better world, if we want a world, an equitable world, if we want a world where everybody has a basic ground to stand on, if that is our goal, vision, you better change many things. Like I think Laura was talking about carbon tax. For example, data. People are stealing data from us and giving us nothing. Okay, so the data is a new oil. So several things. Let's open all the account books. How are you managing my commons? Okay, so the Indian Supreme Court has given a verdict in response to an NGO filing that the state is only a trustee. Natural resources belong to people. The commons belong to people. So the owner of the natural resources has a right to ask the trustee, the custodian, how are you managing my money, my resources? I think let's open everything. Why do you want to very selectively open this and that and say that it's not possible? Let's open everything. Let's have a full talk on this.
Yeah, can I just jump in on that? Yeah, I mean, I really think.
And I think I want to come in as well.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, Carolyn, do you want to speak first?
Yeah, so just wanted to respond to Zoe's question about who are the biggest oppositions to basic income. And I think I'd love to look at it from two levels. I'd love to look at it from a macro level and from a micro level. And these people do everything they can to counter the force of a basic income. And at a macro level, what they say is they want to start using national GDPs and resource capabilities of countries to ask questions such as, so can we afford it? And as Paul has talked about it, Sarath has talked about it, Laura has also given us insight. It is possible. It is a possibility. And one thing that I can say here is we don't have to wait. We don't have to wait for these policymakers to write down how possible this is. And I will give the reason why this is so. Right now in Kenya, people have been opposing a basic income, tooth and nail. And the government has reached a point where they can do nothing to help the people except give them money. And don't ask me where they've gotten the money, but the government has committed about 30 billion Kenyan shillings to deliver in a basic income, to send it to the people. Guinea has committed money. As directly, we've had people talking to us from countries such as Senegal, from Ghana, and they're talking about what can we do to cushion our people. And right now, we are at a time when we cannot close our eyes to the possibilities of a basic income globally, because we are saying that with COVID-19 right now, we're going to create another big problem in terms of poverty. We are going to create a huge gap. Billions of people are going to slide back into poverty. And when they slide back into poverty, we can't continue closing our ears. They are our problem. We can't watch people die. And governments are not going to say, you know what, we're going to create for them jobs. That might not be true. They have to find a quick solution to cushion these people. So that is at a high level. At a micro level, there are people who start dehumanizing poor people and start judging them as people who cannot make decisions, people who are going to drink. And as I have had, I've just seen a question here about economies are going to be flooded, and questions that are basically paternalistic and hindering to the empowerment of poor people. Speaking about these issues is more real, especially from a person who is interacting with people who have been receiving this money. And one thing, there is no inflation or disruption of the economic equilibrium of economies, local economies for populations that are receiving a basic income. That is not true. And there is evidence to that effect. There is a study that has been done here in Kenya, and it's evident that instead of the economies getting disrupted and inflation going up and prices increasing, we actually are seeing improved trade, improved income, even for people who don't receive the money. Do people actually stop working? Do they stop being productive? Guys, let's be real. A lot of times, people who sit on decision-making tables have never been down there to feel the pangs of poverty. We are talking about people who live a day as it comes. We have the luxury of having salaries, and we can plan our lives a month out, a year out. You can plan to own a house. You can plan to eat good food in the next 2 weeks. We are talking about people who eat good food when it arrives. And when you give people a basic income, little as you may imagine that it is, people start planning their lives. People start getting in touch with the reality of what money can do. People start becoming hopeful. That in itself is a game changer. When you increase people's hopes, you increase their innovation. When you give people the ability to plan their lives a year after, I know I will receive $20, $30, $50. I can plan with the $50 I will receive in the next 6 months to do 1 or 2 things. Think about this. In communities, especially here in Africa, I like to talk about Africa because this is where my experience is. Here in Africa, a lot of communities are agricultural based. People depend on farmlands to produce food and to produce income. When you don't have money to eat today, you will lose out your farm, the only source of income, the only source of livelihood. We have seen people who lose out their farms, then they go and work on other people's farms and work for very little money, money that is even less than what we give as a basic income. And when you start giving them money, they claim back their farms. They start working on their farms. They don't work for people anymore. They have their own money. They have a starting point. And that makes the biggest difference. And I don't know when it will take government to sit down and just think about that when I don't go working on somebody's farm, I'm actually bringing innovation in the trigger of the national economy. We are bringing in new contributors to the national economy. And that is what we should be thinking about. How do we trigger our economy? Little money that we give through basic income have innovative ways, have powerful ways of triggering economies to even generate that money that governments are wondering, where are we going to get the money? Let's help our people to be co-producers of economic growth in our countries.
Caroline.
Zoe.
Thank you so much. Very, very powerful.
Zoe, we can't hear you.
Very powerfully indeed.
Barb, you should just go, I think.
Okay, yeah, just to say, yeah, just to agree with everything that's just been said. I think also, you know, in terms of
my video.
Okay, sorry. Just to say that you know, in terms of, you know, like the left, you know, kind of going about, well, we're going to lose services, or we're going to have cuts to benefits or whatever. That's definitely a metropolitan country idea for sure. You know, the fact of the matter is that under austerity, we've been fed this lie that there isn't enough money. When we, you know, money, and I think Julio would agree with this, that money is the one resource that humans create themselves. All right. And, you know, so therefore, you know, we've got to be able, you know, we've got to have a real think about how it's used and who it goes to, you know, and if you've got a whole bunch of company owners or whatever, and they're socking, I mean, you know, companies, large companies like Apple and Google, they are sitting on the largest cash piles ever. All right. And the most money that, you know, it's more money than a lot of countries' GDPs. All right. And I don't, you know, there has to be some way of dealing with that. Now, whether it's about actually requisitioning the money back, or whether it's just saying, right, if your money's in a tax haven, it's not worth anything. So we're going to create some more money that people can use. Or if it, you know, another idea, which I really like is, you know, that you could have, you know, cities could create local currencies. And then if you can tax them back, you know, if the cities can then use that for business taxes or other sorts of, you know, that would kind of validate the money, and it would be, you know, it would make it possible to do pilots or to actually just create basic income within localities. So we don't have to wait for, you know, whole national governments or for the UN or whatever, all right, to actually start creating our own basic income. And so Julio wants to come in now.
Thank you, Barb. Yeah, just to complement what you're saying, actually, this idea of making basic income through local currencies is already happening in places like Brazil. In Latin America, there is a lot of innovation going on with this. The city of Maricá, in the outskirts of Sao Paulo, has made for the last years what they call a basic income on the city level through a currency called Mumbuca. And it's going really well, of course. It's backed by some sort of sovereign fund and also by the Brazilian national currency. And it works. Of course it works. Why wouldn't it work? It's just we're just locked in this imagination that we have to wait for politicians and central banks to give us this money. But we, like, you know, it's as you said, Barb, you know, money is a commons. We make it ourselves. This is the intuition that people have when they say, I make money. You know, you really are making it when you're working. But in practice, it's just a bunch of rent extraction. It comes from banks when they give you a loan, when you give you a debt, and also from central banks. And this is not natural. This is not how it should be. It's just a remnant of some archaic institution of the 17th century. And we must abolish it somehow. We need to like make it democratic and so on, to like really claim back power, decentralized power. You know, as the Black Panthers in the US used to say, all the power to all the people.
Thank you, Julio. Apologies, guys. My Wi-Fi just completely went, so I dropped out for a minute and came back in again, which means I've also lost the chat from when I was in before. So I can remember some of the questions, but I haven't got all of them. But I have got some of the questions to ask. Paul, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm what other people have been saying, basically, and just put a bit of perspective. Is there enough money? The Fed in the United States has been doling out $1 trillion a day during this crisis. Now, Caroline is giving, let's say, $30 a month to 50,000 people in Kenya. If you translate that to everybody in the world, and I would include children, as I said before, if you did that to everyone in the world, that would cost you about 6.6 trillion. There you are. There's the money. Plenty of it. Yeah, the Fed's just doling out money right, left, and center. So we haven't got the money. Absolutely not true. And it's all been revealed recently. It was revealed during the 2008 crisis as well, but this time to an even greater extent. And I'd just like to tell a little story. When I gave out money 20 years ago, both the World Bank and the Malawi government were really against me doing it because they said that the men especially would drink it away. I tracked that money. I interviewed every single person, 1,000 people that received that money. One person, just one, bought alcohol. He was a very old man. He had no family. And I interviewed him and he said, yeah, I bought some seeds and I bought some alcohol and I'm planting my seeds. And when I've finished planting, I'm going to drink the rum. I said, okay. But he had no family. That was the key to it. And I think the point to be made here is that often we see poor people away from their communities, maybe down the mines or building roads all over the world. And those people are the people who at the end of the week might spend the money on alcohol or spend the money on gambling or whatever. But generally, whether you're a man or a woman, if you're living within your community and with your family, you do the right thing. And that is being proven. Okay.
Thanks, Paul. I'm conscious we've got about half an hour left, which is brilliant. And apologies for dropping off. I don't think it was my family on the Wi-Fi, but anyway, I'm back. Let's go to some of the questions in the chat, and people have very patiently, kindly repasted them. Thank you. I really appreciate that. There's one that Anna has asked, and she's asked it again. So I'd like to put that to, and you tell me who you feel wants to answer it from our amazing panel. Do you see universal basic income as the end goal or a stepping stone to a society that relies on money less and is perhaps based on something like a localized gift economy? Who'd like to give that a go with an answer? Oh, Barb, fingers straight up, I think.
Yeah, no, I do see it as a kind of stepping stone. I think what people really discount with money is its symbolic value. I don't think that I don't think there's much hope of getting to a society where we don't need money until everybody has the same amount of money and can rely on it. It's not so much, for me, it's not so much about inequality, it's actually about insecurity. And if you want to, trace the problems that we have with politics at the moment is largely about insecurity and not so much about inequality. That people are really worried about where they're going to get the food next or where they're going to get the rent next, all right? And that actually closes their mind to new ideas. It makes them, people have a tendency then to blame somebody who's not actually responsible for their situation, basically because they're feeling fearful and insecure. So again, it's, I personally see it as a stepping stone to a better society. I'm hoping, you know, that we will get to a point where maybe we don't need money anymore. All right, that would be amazing. But at the moment, and the way people's mindset is right now, I think, you know, we really need to have this, you know, basic security for people, and that's housing, money, well, housing and money basically, and fuel to be able to cook. All right, and that for me would be the three things that are needed.
Yeah, thanks, Barb. That kind of speaks to a comment we have in the chat from Michael, who's talking about it. There's too much discussion focusing on how much money should be paid, and we need more discussion about the building blocks of well-being and what everyone's human rights are. So there's some sympathy for that view in the chat there. Let's see what else in terms of other questions.
Can I add to what Barb has said?
Of course you can. Go for it.
Yeah, I think I of course believe that it is a stepping stone for a better world. But what is that better world? I think there are two important crises that we are facing apart from the employment crisis. That I don't want to go into that. There are two important crises that as a human, as a mankind, we are going through. One is and the ecological crisis, which all of us know, and the reasons also we know. And there's also another crisis, the moral crisis, about what is the meaning of our existence? What is the meaning of our life? Is it more consumerism and more consumerism? And is that the goal of our life? So I think unconditional basic income immediately addresses the question of insecurity. And I think in the process, we should also have the objective of addressing certain pathologies that we have in our society. I think we have become extremely, we have fetishizing consumerism, consumer goods, consume more. I think better life is consume more. Have 2 cars instead of 1, have 2 flats instead of 1. Security means have 2 flats, blah, 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 and all that. I think in the better world, that is not going to bring us a sustainable world and a sustainable life. I think we need to address some of these very serious pathologies of our society. And I think it's across the board. It's nothing about the first world, second world, third world, fourth world, fifth world, and sixth world. Not at all. I think across the board, we are getting into this kind of a thing. We need to address them squarely as part of moving towards that better world.
Thank you, Sarath. I couldn't agree more, quite frankly. I wanted to come up a couple of our audience kindly submitted questions ahead of time on email. So I just wanted to make sure that we don't miss those out and give the panel a chance to answer these. So I'll just come to the first one, which was from Lynn. And this one is about, has anyone done any in-depth feasibility analysis in the UK to determine what level of basic income might be affordable alongside what tax levels, taking into account savings on our current piecemeal benefit system? Bit of a UK focused question there.
Yeah, I mean, there have been quite a few plans that have been put out there which are feasible. It really depends. You know, again, we've been discussing money again as this thing, you know, it's a resource that we all create, all right, or that is created on our behalf. And you know, we know that there's no shortage of it, okay? I mean, we certainly, if we've learned nothing from the last few weeks, we've learned that there's no shortage of money. There are plans, you know, and again, it's like, you know, we get mixed up with the taxes, all right? You know, one of the biggest lies over the last 40 years is that corporations should not have to pay as much tax, all right? So we've seen corporation tax go down. We've seen taxes on dividends. So we're talking about the taxes on unearned income that some people get with unearned income have gone down in the last 40 years, all right? And we get that mixed up income tax, all right, which most people work for, has, you know, relatively speaking, gone up. But now people get mixed up with taxes, all right? Any tax means income tax. No, 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 all right? We can have a lot of different other taxes on people's unearned income, which, you know, are certainly feasible. Compass has been working on this. Stuart Lansley and Duncan McCann have done some work on sovereign wealth. Is it sovereign wealth funds? I can't remember what they call it. All right, but it's basically the equivalent of a sovereign wealth fund. Yanis Varoufakis has proposed that that the large corporations, that governments have some kind of share. And I get Julio's point, which is that, well, we can create this now locally. On the other hand, we've also, given over a lot of resources to the government, and that's why I still campaign politically for this, all right? Because we need to also get our hands on those resources, all right? Yes, let's do it on our own, or let's let, get localities like the one in Brazil do it, all right? But there's, there is a big claim that we have, the unpaid work that we do, whether it's looking after ourselves or each other, or the environment, all of those things. Okay, we've got a big claim on the government. There's a really nice strapline from one of the congressional candidates in New York, and he's talking about a basic income based on data, and his strapline is, we owe us. Okay, we really owe us, all right? We're already doing the work, all right? It's not about like, will we do the work in the future, or will we work for, that question is really about, well, will you work for an employer? What about the things that we want to do, all right, which will benefit the people around us, make us happy, let us have less stress and more income security. And this, again, this is, yeah, there's lots of plans. I mean, if you Google basic income UK, you'll get a plan from the Royal Society of Arts. You can get a plan from Citizens Basic Income Trust. That's called a revenue neutral plan. And those plans, they don't question, okay, the current tax structure. And I think that's actually something that we need to do very strongly going forward.
Okay, thank you, Barb. I was going to get to the next question that was submitted in advance, or the second question. Again, it's kind of from a UK perspective, but actually it doesn't have to be answered. Assuming that if the income given is too small, it is ineffective, and they're better off because £1,000 per head for the entire population will be seen as too high by the government.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
And there was a sort of supplementary there, which was not balance or redistribute wealth. So perhaps the word universal confuses the concept. Anyone want to pick that up?
Zoe, could you just repeat that, because you were a bit...
Yeah, I really couldn't understand, so...
Okay, I will stop my video, it might help. Okay, I'll try it again. So the first one was assuming that if the income given is too small, it's ineffective and therefore wasteful. Is it equitable to give better off people much less than that, or a tax break? Because £1,000 per person in the population will be seen as too high by government. Did you want to come in on that, Paul? Or Laura?
Let Laura go first, and then I'll speak after Laura, maybe.
Thanks.
Laura?
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to say was,
okay.
I think there's basically no amount of money that would be ineffectual. So I'm sure Caroline and Sarath would have examples of this. The basic income that was given in India was incredibly small. In the pilot experiment, it was sort of only like $2, $3, up to $5 or $10 a month at the most per person. So, and then in the UK, if you look at other benefits, like I receive child benefit for my kid, for instance, it's only £20 a week, so sort of 80 something pounds a month. It's a really big help, so there's no amount actually that would be too small, such as to make it a waste. It's never a waste. I think the question is, how much do people need for it to be a basic income that could reasonably, give people a level of security if they're not in paid work as well. That's a difficult question. People have often come to a figure of around £100 a month, assuming that housing benefit remains, has often been sort of floated as a kind of a basic minimum. In terms of whether you should not pay as much to rich people, we've got a page on our website that answers this question of why pay it also to the rich. It's a really good question, and it's a common one. There's a number of reasons. Number one is that if well, number one is that you can just tax it straight back off them through various taxes. So it's easier to just give it to everybody, because if you start not paying it to the rich, then everybody else has to demonstrate that they're not one of the rich, and then you've invented a whole load of bureaucracy that has to go into the scheme and makes it much more complicated. So it's much easier to use the tax system, which already looks at who's rich and who's poor, to just tax it off them and get it back that way. Another good reason to give it to everybody equally is that if you look at systems like the NHS, where, you know, that's the National Health Service for anyone who's coming in from anywhere else, you know, everybody gets access to that. We don't suggest that people above a certain income level shouldn't get access to it. And one of the great things about that is it is so well defended by the population in a political sense. You know, if anyone ever threatens the NHS, even the Conservatives have to pretend that they care about the NHS. So it's, you know, it's really useful to have something that's truly universal, because then, you know, then it goes to everybody. I think what's interesting about the current crisis is that now you've suddenly got a lot of people who previously have been earning good incomes, now on benefits. Funnily enough, suddenly the government have increased universal credit by £20 a week, because they know that once middle class people, you know, once lots of middle class people are receiving it, they won't consider this to be acceptable anymore. So, you know, having people at all different income levels receiving something can help to bolster that system, I think.
Yeah.
Anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing, and that is, those of you who've looked at basic income in developed countries, it's often seen as a reform of the welfare system. And I think there's been hints in today's talk where basically we're not saying that. We don't want it to be as an alternative to welfare. We're saying that it's a right. Our commons have been taken off us. They owe us. We want that money back. And if it's £1,000 a week, fine. Give it to everyone in the world. So this isn't a solution to welfare. This is a right, a human right. Okay.
Thank you, Paul. And that chimes with some of the comments in the chat as well about to move away from talking about an amount of money and the systems, etc., just to actually this is about dignity and human rights and basic needs, which kind of links to one of the other questions that's come up previously. Someone's asked a question about universal basic services. So I'm kind of curious, what do panelists think of you?
Yeah, I didn't quite get all the questions, Zoe, but if it's about universal basic services, yeah, it's really, really.
This isn't how do these
you're
two
really
ideas
breaking
fit
up now.
together? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're really breaking up. It's really unfortunate that the universal basic services idea sort of came up, you know, was kind of invented as an alternative to basic income, and that's certainly not what most basic income advocates feel. All right. You know, the services, a lot of the services, especially the universal services, are very much needed. There are some really good ideas in the specific UBS proposal that came out a couple years ago. Like, say, for example, you know, free broadband and access, you know, and definite access to housing, that sort of thing. But I think, again, you know, I mean, I'm sure people in XR can appreciate this, that, you know, what we can get is very much dependent on how much power we have when we're making the demand. Okay, so if we're making a demand for both basic income and services and, you know, and in some cases jobs, all right, because that's also a question, you know, we should be demanding all of that, all right, because, you know, that's, you know, of course money is not going to solve everything, all right, but it will be a step along the way. And, you know, and then the other problem, I mean, the problem with services, you know, also such as the specific proposal, and again, I'm talking to a specific proposal that was made by UCL a couple years ago. You know, certain things like food is really something very personal to people, and they really should have a choice about it. I mean, this is the problem with the rise with food banks here, is the fact that people, you know, not only does it feel very demeaning to go to a food bank, all right, But then the other thing is you have no choice over what you get, all right, and what you eat, which is one of the most fundamental things about a person is what you eat and making choices over that, you know. So that's where the services don't really, you know, in those sorts of things, that's where they don't really cut it. You know, it's not about trying to put in opposition, you know, healthcare, education, and housing, which we all need, to basic income. It's really about the power we have when we make the demand and, you know, and what we demand. And I think we, you know, need to demand all of it.
Thank you, Barb. Julio, I can see your hand up.
Thank you. I would just, you guys are from XR, right? As far as I understand, you guys are for the regeneration of the ecology, right? I think it's very important to say that today the biggest threat to the ecology are private banks. These institutions are basically accelerating the level of entropy in the planet, because this is where economic growth happens. All of the evils that sort of we are all up sort of against start when a bank gives out a loan with a positive interest to people, to corporations, to bailing them out and so on. This just makes the extraction of the world's resources go at a faster rate. If we do not decentralize this, then there is no way we can get off, get off the path that's going towards the cliff.
That's really a powerful way of looking at it at global level, Julio, thank you. But which links to a question which has also come up, which may or may not be the last question before we come towards a close, but we had a couple of kind of comments and questions a little bit earlier in the chat about along the lines of, you know, if we want to support this, we want to see this change, where do we add our voices? How do we organise at local and national level to help push for this change? So it'd be interesting to hear some voices on that. Who'd like to come in first on that? Laura, I can't see everyone on my screen, so forgive me if Sarath or Caroline want to come in, I can't see. So if anyone who can see, do so. Do you want to come in first, Laura, and then hand over to a colleague?
Yeah, Caroline put her hand up after as well, so yeah, come to her after. In terms of how we make this change, you know, this movement, like 10 years ago, people weren't talking about it. Now, loads of people are talking about it. You know, MPs, even some Conservative MPs and Lords in the UK are demanding this. So, you know, never doubt that this is making progress. It really is. And it's not always easy to see how we contribute to it, but by continuing to talk about it, by having, you know, meetings like this, there will be some people on this call who are already the converted. There'll be some people who are the partially converted. There'll probably be some people that really didn't know much about this, and all, you know, that will go on. And, you know, we need to all continue those conversations elsewhere. We need to invite more people into these conversations that that don't already know about this. We need to take this discussion into forums. Like, so for instance, this is an Extinction Rebellion meeting. This is about environment. It's not about incomes. And yet here we are talking about universal basic income. This is a new forum for us. So it's, you know, it really is spreading out. And if you know, this is happening with XR North, but, you know, I'm involved in a number of basic income sort of discussion groups and stuff. Stuff like this is happening all over the country, all over the world, especially at the moment, especially in response to the pandemic. There is loads going on. So I think the important things are, you know, take part in discussions, talk to people, you know, in person or, you know, remotely in person, take part in the social media discussion, share things. That's so useful. You know, get things out there, make demands of your politicians, especially politicians that ought to be on our side. You know, the British Labour Party really should be supporting basic income by now, and it's still on the fence. It's not going to take too much more to tip them over. Loads of people within the Labour Party believe in this proposal. So it's not going to take much more, and then hopefully, you know, surely they'll one day get elected to government again, and then we could actually have this in the UK. In terms of the global movement, we need to just start these conversations globally. We need to start talking about world basic income when we talk about issues like poverty, when we talk about inequality, when we talk about national basic income, we need to bring in the global angle. But in terms of organising locally, that's another brilliant way. Just it keeps the energy going, it keeps the momentum and events happening. And there's loads of groups that you will find by a simple Google. So there's absolutely tons that we can do, and people already are doing, and it is working.
Yeah.
Can we go to Caroline, and then I'm going to ask perhaps one more question?
Yeah, what I was going to say is, in terms of building momentum for basic income, we have different approaches that, in addition to what Laura has said, building a bottoms-up approach, building pressure from below, so that we have more people. The people who need a basic income are the people who need to have the voices to ask for the basic income. They know what it does to their lives. They know what changes it does. So we need to recruit more grassroots advocates of basic income to speak about either their experiences or what anticipated changes they hope to see with a basic income. As advocates of basic income, I see that we have a responsibility to position basic income as a responsibility of us all, to make sure that humanity is given the humanity it deserves, that we care for the people for the care that they need, and that we position basic income as a human right, not an alternative. I'd love to see a world in which advocates for basic services, basic health, can see the reality of, the fact that a basic income is just as good as basic services, and that we are not coming in to replace basic services, because we can never. Basic income will actually even go into some of those basic services. But what we are saying is, as we put a force for governments to put in basic services for its people, they must also respect the fact that having resources in your hands gives you an ability to make micro-level decisions that governments can never make for whole communities. That's a very important part of humanizing people, empowering people, and giving them a choice. And one example I can give is, there has been a lot of talk about universal health. There has been a lot of talk about universal basic education. In our countries, for example, in my country, we have universal basic education. But I will tell you, parents need money in their pockets for these children to access even that universal basic education. Education is free, but there are things that parents still have to provide for their children. They have to provide food. They have to provide uniform. There are things that don't come free with universal basic education. So let's push government to provide basic services, but also come to the realization of the importance of choice and empowerment at the micro level. I think as basic income advocates, we also need to realize that sometimes there can be political sabotage, that politicians may use basic income to build the numbers and get people to follow them and feel that, I am driving a vision that is going to deliver Canaan into your hands. In reality, they are looking for their votes. We have to hold these politicians to account. They have to move with the advocacy for basic income, whether they win or they don't. They have to stay at the forefront, pushing for policy, whether they are looking for political seats or not, so that basic income is then not branded as a political vehicle for people who want to get power into their hands. It should be seen as an emancipation of people who lack, people who need to be cared for by those who are in positions of authority and in positions of decision making. Because people will soon abuse basic income, and then we will remain a laughing stock, and we will be sucked into the political conversations, which will then give us the populist attitude of people who are just looking to take another group looking to take advantage of disadvantaged people. So I think that for me is a really important thing, that we hold decision makers, policy makers, politicians to account. If you stand on the forefront, stand for basic income now and forever. We need to recruit more people. We need to conversion and retention, convert and retain advocates at all levels. We need to get the basic services advocates to join the basic income advocates. We need the basic healthcare, universal basic healthcare advocates to join the basic income advocates. We need real allies to help us convert and retain more and more advocates.
Yeah, powerful.
I think we also need to be tolerant. As basic income advocates, we need to be tolerant. Because remember, when you're doing advocacy, small gains, step by step, will lead to big gains. Let's not say that a 6-month, 2-year, 10-year basic income is not a basic income. We want something that will last forever. Let us take one step at a time and see success There's a time when no one would think about a basic income even for 1 month. If we get people who can be there to listen to a basic income, something that looks like a basic income that can run even for 1 year, let's get those people on our side. And then let's build them to be our allies, to be part of the advocates, to push for an even longer lasting basic income. I think that would be, for me, the push as an advocate of basic income.
Wow. I could listen to you guys speak all afternoon, all evening, quite frankly. You're totally inspiring bunch of people. We have 2 minutes remaining, and I need to apologise to Lawrence, who's been very patient wanting me to ask a question, but I'm going to ask it and just ask for one view on it before we wrap up. Lawrence's question was, he was really interested in, as panel members, what specific principles, methods of universal basic income or policy do you favour as your model? Because there are so many different models out there. Maybe we could just get 1 or 2 answers on that before we close out. Who haven't we heard from for a while? Sarath?
Yeah, I can't comment on the models that are circulating in UK, but I think the heart of the matter, there are 2 points extremely important. One is about the models. I think the most important part of the very ethos of basic income is the unconditionality. Any scheme that has any kind of conditionality, I think, is not basic income. Basic income is unconditional. It has to be unconditional. If you're talking about, then you're talking about something else if you are imposing any kind of conditionality. The last point I would just like to highlight here is that we have to question the accepted narratives like private inheritance. I think we have taken private inheritance so much for granted and completely forgot about public inheritance. I think we have to reclaim the idea of public inheritance. What is it that we have inherited? And how can one inventor have intellectual property rights on something for such a long time? I think those are very critical questions, especially I think Paul and Laura are thinking so much about the world basic income. I think that's a very crucial question about why should you privatize the public inheritance? Where, in what domains are we privatizing the public inheritance? I think those are very crucial questions we need. Yeah, thank you.
Indeed. Thank you so much. I'm conscious it is 5 o'clock, and literally I think almost all the participants are actually still on the call. So I think that shows volumes of actually how amazing this panel is, what an amazing topic it is, your passion, your expertise, your experience, the learning that's going on. There's lots of great comments about the inspiration. Thank you so much. I think there's definitely appetite for a follow-up session if you guys are up for it. There's a lot of interest, and I'm sure a lot of people will want to connect with you. I thank you for sharing your information in the chat. This has been recorded, so we will be putting it out as widely as possible, and obviously sharing it with amazing panel members so you can share it wider if you wish to. Thank you so much for all participants. Thank you to all our incredible panel members, and thank you to Rachel for helping facilitate behind the scenes. Feel free to stop recording, and we'll say good night, happy May Day, and have a safe weekend.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye, Zoe. Thank you so much for